can you see this person's perspective, but can you see beyond this barrier that is in front of you right now? And we do get to that place of gratitude and actually appreciation. Now, it takes us refusing to stay in a victim mindset in order to do that.
Woo! I was just telling people about the show today and how we're going to talk about lifting the suitcase of grief. Lifting the suitcase, and it's a heavy subject, grief.
It is a heavy subject.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about, I have a dear friend. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and just so that, I don't know if folks know this, but sometimes we get that time. So if we ever talk one another, it's nothing personal. We just.
Well, Teri, I've got we're having some issues today. I don't know exactly what's causing it on that end, but we're going to do a shout out today to Wayne, who's watching. Good morning to you, Wayne, and good morning to Elizabeth. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That is very kind of you. Teri's logged out. She's going to log back in. Leslie, who is part of our show from Germany. I know this is... Teri she never has frozen before. And I've gone to a new platform. I hope that you guys can see a little bit better. I've moved to a new studio, the Main Street Studios for Main Street Media. And we're going to be adding this in a podcast form. So all of the previous shows I'm turning into audio, and you're going to be able to go back and listen and share those as well. And so I hope that you guys will be part of it. We're going to start today off with dealing with grief. A dear friend of mine lost her mother, and she is on a trip of a lifetime. Everything is happy. Everything is glorious. But here's the deal. Grief washes over you. Grief happens. And she said, I don't understand how I can be having such a beautiful time. Everything is wonderful. And then it just hits you like a ton of bricks. And I want to talk to some of you about how that works, how grief affects you. See, yes, we can. So good. I'm glad that it's clear. I'm glad that you guys are able to see. A shout out to Suzanne and Mark Thomas. Hopefully, Teri will get back in touch with us and we'll get to discuss a little bit. Here's the deal. Grief happens in stages. And if you are in the process of losing someone, let's say that you have someone that you are the caregiver for, grief starts before they leave us. You know what I mean? Grief starts before they leave us. Grief starts happening as we start seeing the change in our life and what the passing of someone is going to do to our system. Hi, Richard. Richard's listening from Texas right now. Grief is something that we carry, and it's not just the loss of a person, it's also the loss of a job. We have to process our grief, or our grief processes us. Do you know what that means? If we don't process our grief processes us. It will pop out in the form of anger. We're just difficult to be with. It causes issues and they pop out. I'm going to go in and see. Teri?
I'm back.
You are, and you look beautiful.
Thank you. That was, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden it was like, you don't have any connection. So I had to go grab the phone.
Well, see, it works just fine. See, that's what it is. And Gloria, honey, you're listening to live. You are part of it. Gloria is part of our thing. And she says, hashtag replay. Well, it's so good. I'm glad people can watch on the replay. But what I was just bringing up about grief is that we have to process our grief, or our grief processes us.
Absolutely. Grief does not discriminate, nor does it won't be denied. So one way or the other, we have to cultivate a skill set that allows us to walk with it so that it does not overburden us or bully us.
Bullied by grief is a bad place because because we're dealing with something. And I always say that sometimes it's the person at the drive-through at a fast food restaurant who screams at you over an order. They might be dealing with grief and we have no idea how that comes out. But when we walk through grief and then we catch ourselves in the process of screaming at someone, I call it kicking the dog. The dog didn't do anything, but it comes out in some way.
And it will come out all kinds of sideways if you're not at least aware of how your grief shows up for yourself. And it shows up differently for all of us. I work with families all the time who, as a collective unit, are grieving. And each one of those individuals grieve differently. Just because they're in the family doesn't mean that they all grieve the same, because each one of those individuals have different relationships with the situation, the person, whatever it is.
What a lot of people don't know is that how I met Teri is she reached out to me when I lost my father. And that's literally how we met. And she said, you may not need me now, but if you do, I'm here. And I didn't know what a life coach was. I didn't know what a grief coach was. I didn't know. I said, is this like therapy? Because I've tried that. Did not work for me.
Right.
And then I realized I needed you for a lot. And I call them my Teri tools that helped me get through the passing of my father. And Elizabeth had something that happened yesterday. She said, it always amazes me how the waves of grief can come when we least expect it. A song, a phrase I hear someone say, and bam, bawling like it happened yesterday.
Absolutely. And that's because the receptors in our brain, I'm not going to get real deep off on the brain work, but the receptors in the brain recognize that. It taps into those emotions, and then we are catapulted back into that place. You know, I work with people that will sit in front of me and be sharing, if we're talking about particularly a loved one, they'll be sharing something, an incredibly fond memory. And they'll, you know, and they'll go there and they're sharing it and they're smiling, and you can literally feel the joy, the happiness as they're sharing the story. And then they'll finish the sentence. They'll take a brief pause, and then you can just see the veil of grief close back down over the top of them. And the energy completely shifts. And that is a wave that is expected when we're grieving. So knowing that it happens, knowing that we can have moments of happiness, and we will be met sometimes with, you know, moments of sadness. So they're going to vacillate back and forth because it is truly a dance.
Right. Grief and guilt often are traveling companions. If you're the survivor, sometimes we carry and we walk on that same path, guilt, grief, guilt, grief, guilt, grief. Let's unpack what guilt has to do with grief and why it makes it so hard to move on.
Well, a lot of times the guilt is directly related with the relationship that we have had with a person or an animal or a job, whatever it is. The guilt is directly related, where maybe we feel we should have done, could have done more. Maybe there's instances where things are shared and there's a heaviness, there's a realization there that, wow, you know, shit just got real in the arena of grief. You know, I will share this. You and I talked about this morning a little bit. And I don't typically go out and share this publicly, but if I'm going to, why not do it here? Because I believe in the message that we send, and I think that us being transparent has a lot to do with that. So, when I was married to a man named Les in 2004, 2006, and he was diagnosed with cancer. And as you know, he passed away a year and a half after we married. But in his final days, one of the things that he said to me, which this falls in that guilt thing, it also falls in as caretakers, us learning that when people that we love are dying, they can say some things that maybe aren't intended to be hurtful, but can be incredibly hurtful. And we were having a conversation one day, and he looked at me and he said, I'm jealous. I'm angry and I'm jealous. And I said, of what? About what? And he said, I'm angry that I have to die, and I'm jealous that you get to live.
Wow.
And that hit
Ouch.
me. Yeah, that hit me like somebody backed up in the Mack truck and didn't have the beep beep on. I mean, I didn't know what to do with that. So I had to sit with it. And I understood. So that to say that the people that we love, when they are facing their final days, weeks, hours, they're going to be incredibly transparent with us. We have to do our work to be in a place as a caregiver where we can receive that, not take it personally, because it's not about us. It's about what they're feeling. Also, I understand that sometimes people are in situations with the people that they're caring for can be incredibly cruel and hurtful. And that has to do with the fear of transitioning as well. Sometimes people are just kind of asses anyway, and as life, and we can be young or we can be old, we can be healthy, we can be dying. It doesn't really change the way we show up. But when we are in that place of the grief work, most definitely, different characters come into play there. So as a caregiver, understanding that you may have waves of grief, you may have waves of guilt, you may even have waves of being relieved.
Yeah. Margie Singleton just joined us, and she lost the love of her life, her husband, Leon. They were singing partners. They traveled together, ministry partners, and everyone has to have time to grieve. We can't go forward until grief has its day. And this is from a wise woman who's walked that path.
Absolutely. I'm glad Margie's with us today. I love her.
She's just wonderful. And
she is.
And here's the thing, we can move past it and we can move through it, but it doesn't mean it won't come back and knock on our door and visit someday.
Oh, absolutely. And grief over time has a way of settling. And I don't mean it settles in the sense of we don't think about it anymore, or it's a non-factor anymore. It's quiet. It rests is what it does. And we all have loved ones who have passed years ago. Some last week, some will be today, some have been 30 years ago. Right. And the difference is grief can bubble up, and you can sit with it and have an acknowledgement of it, and then gently flip that into loving memories or fun things that you remember about that person. And that allows grief and sorrow to walk hand in hand. As sorrow taps into more of our ability to not be stuck. People will say, I just grieve all the time. And we actually, it's not healthy to grieve all the time, just like it wouldn't be healthy to laugh all the time or to, cry all the time or to be mad all the time. There's a balance with that stuff.
Yeah. Feel the mountains and valleys.
Absolutely. And embrace them because they're not going anywhere. We can numb it. We can say, I don't do emotions. And I tell people, if you don't do emotions, they're doing you, because I can assure you, if you say, I'm not going to deal with these emotions, they're unpleasant. I'm going to go
Mm-hmm.
eat, drink, smoke, shop, whatever, find somebody to date. You're setting yourself up for a catastrophic drop at some point.
Right. And the other side of that is you cannot replace someone or something that you've lost. You know, you're not going to find someone, and it's unfair for someone to have to fill the gap for someone else, a new job to fill the gap of a job that you've lost. Grief comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it can be people, it can be things, it can be whatever. It can be if you lose the use of your legs or you lose a limb, you're going to have to grieve that loss. And just because you have a prosthetic, it will help you get from point A to point B, but it will not replace that limb. You know what I mean? Things are
Right.
going to be different. Then you have to go to, okay, well, this is me and this is me now. I look at our returning veterans who come back and they've seen combat and they've lost something. And that grief is a
Right.
different kind of grief.
Right. Well, that grief oftentimes has got a lot of, well, not that lots of grief has trauma in it, but there's a different, when you're talking about military grief, that trauma is a bit different than our grief growing up. Not that it's any better, worse, stronger, lesser. It's just different. One thing I will say about grief is that if we go through life and we don't process our grief, we don't reconcile it and understand it, then as we get older, when things happen, they tend to become more intense. And the reason that they're becoming more intense is because all of that unresolved stuff is in going, yay, now I get a chance. And it all piggybacks. And before you know it, you don't know why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And sometimes it can level you to the point where you just don't want to get out of bed.
Truth.
You know, that you don't even want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
If you have lost someone to suicide or to substance, the guilt is heavy. Why couldn't I have done something to change this situation? Could I have stopped it? Why wasn't I enough? How do we handle those three things? What could I have done to stop it? Why wasn't I enough? That's huge. And that's a heavy thing to put on top of the grief.
Mm-hmm. And for as heavy as that is, the answer in and of itself is, it seems shallow, but it's not. It's not our journey. You know, it's not about us being enough. So we don't need to make it about us being enough. It's about a sickness. It's about a disease. It's about another person's journey. And we can't get inside their head to unravel that stuff, particularly if they can't unravel it. So they, professional help is definitely, guidance would definitely be a key there.
Excuse me. Thank you. Sorry, we live and in person.
Professional guidance is going to be a help there. When we take our, and to say uneducated, I mean that if we're not skilled in, preventing suicide, or if we're not skilled in addiction, then we can love someone, but we have to be careful that we're not loving them literally to death and what I mean by that is by enabling them. So if you love someone who is struggling, if they're open to it, point them to, help, to support. If you have lost someone, then you doing your work around, it's not about you. And that's a hard one.
Yeah,
it's a hard one, but it's not. And to allow yourself to not carry that weight, because you learning how to process your grief, learning that you know, we can take on way more than we are intended to take on. And
Right.
that makes a heavy rock to crawl out from under.
My brother-in-law, who is gifted, he is 37 years for my people in the program that I have found a lot of peace in. He told me, he said, you know what you got to do? Now, he lost 2 siblings to suicide, 2. And in one family, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you have to take your ego out of it. The egos in us says, I could have saved them.
Mm-hmm.
But it is truly something. In one of my rooms, somebody told me something that really gave me help. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it. You can't fix it. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it. You can't fix it. And when I repeat those things to myself, it takes me out of the equation. And I go, you know what? It's like you said, not my journey. I can show up as a friend, as a compadre. I can show up as a sibling or whatever, but I cannot walk their journey. I cannot take on their weight. Elizabeth is really insightful in this. As a suicide survivor, I can say that what was going on was me and my inability to deal with life and my world. And Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that, for being so vulnerable enough to share that. Absolutely.
Yes. And that's what I mean when I say that we can't get inside. No one can get inside our heads, right? If we're open, we can have support and we can have a guiding with that. But we all, as human beings, have pockets of ourself, our deepest self, that we don't share with other people. And those are typically the pockets that the people wonder after the fact, why couldn't I have done something? Well, as Elizabeth just said, you know, she had to be the one to do that. And
right.
You know, and it takes self-love and awareness to do that, even when that self-love is kicking our butt.
Sure. And grief does not have an expiration date. There will be someone who says, okay, it's been 2 months, get over it. You're going to have somebody in your life. If you're grieving something, someone is going to show up in your life and they're going to say, well, you know, you're just going to have to move on.
Right.
Okay. That person, I'm not going to say they're not your friend, but you got to find the people who say, feel what you feel and you're safe.
And here's the thing, feel what you feel and acknowledge it, but also know yourself well enough to know if you are choosing to stay in it because it's serving in some way. And I don't say that lightly, because we all know that grief is not light. But there can be times when we're grieving or we're sad and we have people that come around and they want to help and help and help. And maybe they're not always around. So it can feel really, we can become bonded with that emotional charge of being cared for ourselves when we've been the caregiver for so long. And that can tend to lock us into our grief. And that's an unfair thing to do to ourselves.
That's a write it down thing. We can become bonded with that feeling, that pitiful moment, that becoming bonded with that. It can become the excuse of why, you know, there's a scene in the show I love, Golden Girls, which I get a lot of my wisdom from. And Betty White is going to the cabinet over and over and over and taking these pain pills. And somebody catches her and she starts acting kind of woo. And they catch her and they said, oh, well, what are you taking? And she said, it's for my back. I threw my back out. And they said, when did you throw your back out? I didn't know that you'd hurt yourself. She goes, oh, 25 years ago. And sometimes we are continuing to sit. And that's an example of grief. We continue to sit in something 25 years and use that as an excuse for, I don't go to parties anymore because I lost my husband. I don't participate in a job because I lost my child.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes an excuse.
Or I retired and now I don't have any friends.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
retirement is one of those things that we grieve. And many people will say, you know, well, why in the world would you grieve retirement? Because, like, you are finally out of that 9 to 5. You should celebrate. You should. You could. But here's the thing, the routine that you've had, you're getting coffee and you're chatting with the people in the hall and hearing about people's families and having a responsibility and an identity.
And you're needed.
And you're needed. And all of that shifts. And when it shifts, you know, we think to ourselves, I'm ready for this. And then it happens. And a week into it, it's like a vacation. 2 weeks into it, it's like, holy moly, like, what have I done? And 3 weeks into it, you're ready to start handing out, you know, umbrella rain bags at Walmart because you can't take not doing anything anymore.
Right.
And it doesn't affect everybody.
True. I mean, honest to God, that is the truth.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I had to deal with a certain amount of grief when my favorite employer decided that I was not their favorite employee.
Exactly.
They did a new thing and I'm going, but I didn't do anything wrong, and things without our control. This year has been packed full of it. There are people right now going, 2020 took my livelihood, took my job, took whatever. Now you can sit down and you can say, I'm a victim of 2020. Or you can say, okay, I'm being forced to make a change. Now what you going to do with it?
Well, and depending on how we look at that, you know, change, forced to make a change, we're stepping outside of our comfort zone, you know, and that is that can cause some grief, you know, but giving, you know, back to the grief with it not being denied, it won't be denied. We can fool ourselves and say, I don't do emotions. I don't do that grieving. You know, you can't do anything about it. It is what it is. Life moves on. That's the hand you're dealt. All of those are great Band-Aids for the moment. But when you have enough of those, eventually you may turn around and go, golly, can I not catch a break? Why does this keep happening? You know, now some people will say, well, law of attraction, you're attracting it. Other times it's like, you know what? It's just, it's life that's unfolding. And some of those folds they've got a lot in them. And how we choose to process that and sit with that and move with it. We're not pushing against it, you know, because then you're exhausted and it's still there. You know, we're learning to move with it. And when we do it effectively, then the next time something comes up, we've got a skill set to continue moving it with it. Now, that does not mean that, you know, our griefs, our losses are not devastating. In no way does it mean that. And you're right. People who say, well, good Lord, you've been grieving for 6 months. You should it's time to move on with your life now. That's a person who doesn't process their grief, or perhaps they process their grief effectively, and they think everyone else should. The grieving process is an individual journey. There are no two alike, not even if you are. I've worked with people who are, and I know people who are siblings, and they have completely different grieving processes and styles when they are grieving a parent or even another sibling.
Truth. I mean, for me, I took everything that belonged to my father and I kept it. My mother got rid of everything and sent it to me. And I go, what am I going to do with all this stuff? Now, after you've slept in their bathrobe, after you've covered up in their blankie, after you have looked at all of their awards, after a while you go, wait a minute. How do I feel better with this? Okay, first of all, you start blessing people in the way that you can. For me, it was a yard sale, and I watched a man that was just my father's size, and I've used this story before. He walked away with tears in his eyes because he had new pants for a job that he was starting. and he had no business attire. My dad had beautiful business clothes, and he took extreme care of them. So all of these beautiful suits and things, this man walked away with a box of them, and he said, I never could have afforded this.
Nice.
Thank you. And I could see and feel my father's presence. And it tears me up to even think about it, to say, that's what I wanted done.
Yes.
And that's how we move past that grief. What would they want for us if they were, and I use the term of, we're surrounded, and this is scripture, surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. They're all around us because the human spirit, our souls are bigger than bodies can contain after death.
Right. And, you know, and because those loved ones stay with us, and because you are paying forward a wonderful gift for someone else, for something that may not serve you anymore. You know, it takes people, it takes a minute, as you know, to get to that place, because oftentimes, I think we talked about this when we had Jackie on, oftentimes there's so many memories, and there's an obligation, an unspoken obligation, or an unspoken expectation, that if we give away something that belonged to them, then we're saying, we don't need them anymore. They don't matter anymore. We don't care. That could not be the furthest from the truth. It could not be the furthest from the truth. But we have to be careful, because, you know, memories are in our heart and our mind, really. And so you can have totes of stuff upstairs in the attic and never touch them. And you yourself die one day, and somebody comes in and gives it all to Goodwill. You know, you still have the memory, you know, so sharing that, and sharing whatever someone is in a space to share, you know, that allows that grief process to heal also, because you're infusing new core memories with a core memory of a pain.
Let's talk about resources and wrap it up with resources. First of all, I will suggest that you go to a specialist. If you have the resources to go to someone like Teri and Transcending Turbulence, that's what helped me. And if you have that moment, if you don't have the resources for that, there are free organizations that are wonderful to be a part of. Compassionate Friends for people who have lost a child or a sibling. It's compassionatefriends.org.
Absolutely. Yes. And there are so many. We actually should probably list a few of them on the links today, just so that people will have those. One thing that I will say about, you know, it's easy. We live in a world of social media these days, and a lot of support groups online are fantastic. But you also have to know that when we are in a large support group, meaning it's open to the world and anybody can join, and you've got thousands and thousands of people, there's going to be a percentage of people you're not going to resonate with. So it is really important, if you're in a space, to reach out and connect, either by face, by voice, with a support group, if that's the route you're going to take, so that you can connect with people and begin that healing process, rather than, I guess the point I'm making is, you know, we live in a world of memes right now, and memes are wonderful. They can be incredibly empowering, but memes are not necessarily support.
Right. Exactly.
So get some interaction with other humans.
There are groups that can really, really help. And I will say that it's the really affordable therapy, and that is our fellowships for isms. And I go, AA, Al-Anon was my organization. I'm just going to come right out. I busted my own anonymity here, but it was very, very helpful. And I'm going to tell you, it's great for grief, because you will be surrounded by people who've walked in the same shoes that you've walked in. Another organization, if you have a lot of your hospice organizations have grief counseling attached to it. And many times those resources are free.
Gilda's Club has got a great one. You know.
So we want to make sure that you guys have the resources. And Wayne says, I think I might need to be hitting up Teri. Well, you could not make a mistake by doing that, Wayne. And Teri does a lot of work virtually now, but she does have an office. I've done both. and phone consultations
Yeah.
were very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we meet people where they are, and right now in this world we're living in, virtual it feels comfortable to people. I personally have always and will always prefer face to face because I just do. But I am mindful that people they're gonna be more comfortable meeting where they're comfortable. So if
Yeah,
you're
and
an
if you're
person, great. If not,
yeah,
virtual.
and somewhere else, if you're like, because I know Wayne is not in this area, so that works really well too.
Oh, absolutely.
And we all have to find our place, and don't feel bad that it takes too long. Don't feel like you're not in a position. If you, this is my other tool. Okay, find a group that you work with, get help and help that resonates. Then find your free groups that you can be a part of. But you and I talked about this morning. Everybody needs their safe people.
Yes. And you're not going to probably have a tribe of these safe people. You're going to have one, maybe two, three if you're lucky. And these are people who will let you be where you are, let you share what you need to share. They're not going to try to fix you. They're not going to say flowery things that are going to try to make you feel better. They're going to be okay with you feeling like shit and smelling like shit and being okay with that, because they're going to sit there to hold you up. And that's what it's about. Getting that space where you have someone who can say, you know what, it's okay.
Right.
They're not going to try to redirect or, it's just like, and
Not
and knowing that they're that person that can say, I love you to bits, but I don't have the bandwidth to hold this right now.
Rigorous in our honesty.
Absolutely.
Rigorous honesty, and being there does not mean fixing it. That's not what I'm talking about. When I say safe space, I mean, let's say you're really mad one day because you are having to change the diapers for a person you are married to, and they don't know who you are, and they're mad at you and they hate you in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you just want to run away and say, okay, then change your own diapers.
Right.
You're going to have some guilt about that because they can't help it. But you need to have somebody that you can go and say, this is what happened, and I'm really mad and I'm really angry, and I need to have a sounding board and a place to go. That's what I mean by safe person. Someone who's not going to judge you because you don't want to do your job.
Right. And someone who's not going to commiserate with you and go, girl, I know exactly how you feel. I wouldn't do that either. That's not helpful.
No.
Because there's already, whether it's in the forefront or on the tail end, there's likely going to be some guilt, some shame, and we don't need to do anything to flower that stuff up, because there's nothing to be shameful for having the emotions that we have and the feelings that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that we latch on to that is because other people have shamed us at some point. Therefore, we feel we should be different. And it's okay to be human.
It is okay to be human.
Absolutely.
And as we were talking this morning, it is what it is. It takes what it takes. And grief is as long as the road goes.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to learn to walk in it. And there's not going to be some magic trick that comes in and one day all of a sudden maybe we fall in love again and everything is rosy and we never have a day of grief. No. But life could still have joy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process. And understanding individually how you grieve, where it shows up in your body, how your mood shifts, what irritates you, what sparks you to cry, what brings you to laughter. Understanding your grief will be your best tool, because then you can articulate that to other people, so that maybe, I've had clients that'll say, God, everybody thinks I'm just a jerk because I'm so cynical and I go to sarcasm and da 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 da. That's the way they deal with grief. It's not the most healthy way to deal with grief, but it works for them in that moment. And they're working towards finding other ways to be at peace with the way that that works for them?
Well, there are a few additional tools as healing music. And I encourage you, and you don't have to go buy anything. Go to YouTube and look at healing music, healing tones. There's an artist named Stephen Halpern that is really helpful. He has healing music, but you turn me on to binaural beats, and those are on YouTube as well. Very easy. And they might be, you go for depression, for grief, for whatever. There's something about what it does to your brain. And those are just some little tools. Anything about diet. I know that if I have sugar and lots of it, it's going to bring on depression.
Sugar and caffeine jack us up, right? They keep us going. And grief is the one that says, I don't really want you to go right now. I want you to sit with me. Just sit with me. People that sit with, I posted something on Facebook a long time ago, and this is not my quote, but, people who sit with their anger long enough often find that it's the grief. And people that sit with their fear long enough often find that it's grief. Grief is at the root of a lot of things, but it's the contrast of life. So where there is grief, there is also joy. We have to work them together to find that.
And there's a book that I want to leave people with that I found that it's wonderful. It's by Ianla Van Zant, and it's One Day My Soul Just Opened Up. And it is a beautiful book, and I want to encourage you. I mean, it's been out for a long, long time. You get you a used copy so you can highlight it and write in it. Yes. Or buy a new copy and make it all yours, and then pass it on to somebody and leave it to somebody when you're done with it. It's a beautiful book. And well, that's all our show for today. And Teri, tell them how they can get in touch with you.
I am here on Facebook, or I can be reached at teripugh.com, TERIPUGH.com.
Teri with an I and one R. I'm Devon O'Day, and you can go to devonoday@gmail.com, or you can leave me a message at any of the places where you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, because we are on YouTube as well.
Nice. And we're both on Instagram. So I'm Transcending Turbulence there, and you're
and then we have
in Main Street.
Yeah, and we have Launch Date Show on there as well. Gloria, thank you for being. She says thank you both so much. Gloria, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Wayne Best says, I love this. Oh, she's amazing. And she is.
Well, I'm so glad that, thank you. And I'm so glad that you guys have joined in. And if you have topics you want to hear from us, shoot us messages, leave them below, and let us know, because we would love to address them and talk about them. I mean, obviously, we're not going to talk about anything outside our scope. Like I'm not going to talk to you about changing a transmission in a car. But if you got things you want to talk about that's in the scope, then we're going to do it.
I'll get Joe on. My Joe. My angel Joe is Mr. Carman. And so I say, okay, Joe, we're going to need you to be on our show today and teach us how to change our transmission. Okay, we're not going to do that. But Leslie, who's watching in Germany, says, great show, very insightful. Lisa Green, sharp red glasses. Well, thank you. You know what? Being blind gives us a chance to really have fun. I could really rue the day that I lost my eyesight, or I could just wear really fun frames. And so
that's right.
Glasses.com, affordable eyewear at under $10.
Look, shameless plug right there. Just
there you go.
Boom, just like that.
All right. Bye, everybody. We're so glad that you're part of it. If you see something or you've heard something, tag somebody in this and share it with them. Sharing is caring, and we love that you're part of Launch Date. It is heavy lifting for a lighter spirit. God bless you. Have a great day.
Increase the peace. See ya.